Hello and welcome. This is the second in a two-part um, presentation about the physiology section of the swim coaches course. The first one concentrated on muscle composition. This one is going to concentrate mostly on the energy sources. There's a lot more. The muscle composition one is a bit shorter, and so I've put a lot more introductory information into that one, which I don't intend to repeat here because this subject's going to take a lot longer. If you've seen part one, you'd have seen this. Now, this is my attempt to make the subject intelligible by illustrating it. If you've seen part one, we correlated the muscle composition here with this range of sports, and it parallels, the range of sports also parallels this sequence of fuel sources, and that the fat does not break down into glycogen. Fat actually has a different pathway of its own, but I've put it along this line here to show that this is how these fuels are used in sequence. So fat is the last one that you resort to. I'm going to come back to this whole diagram and explain more about these sports in detail towards the end. Now, this is for the adults, the parents. You may think that your exercising days are over, and you've just sort of given away any attempt to keep yourself fit. Well, there are some little things that you can do and some not so little things you can do. Here's one little thing that you can do, and it all goes to plan. I'll insert here the animation of this box breathing technique, whereby you breathe in for 4. Well, it's ideal if you're walking. Count in time with your steps. So you'll go. You'll breathe in for 4 steps, hold for 4 steps, breathe out for 8. We'll do that in the animation if all that works. You could do this sitting up in a chair. If you're laid up in bed, you could do this. It won't be as effective as exercising at the same time, but you could do it. Also for the adults, I'll show this again later. It's very, very important for the competitive athletes, but you can see here that it doesn't really matter what age you're at. This can be applied lifelong. This is the definition of aerobic based conditioning, and it's the first of 8 that I've got in my coaching manual. It's fairly simple. It's very, very effective. It's very efficient at getting you fit, provided you conform to the definition. So what you do is you subtract your age from 220. I'll just work through this. When I was 60 years old, that made the arithmetic simple. 60 from 220 is 160, and then 3/4 of 160 is 120. When I was 60 years old, most of you will be a bit above that. So I've noted here for age group swimmers an estimate of about 150 beats per minute applies to them. So their range for this kind of conditioning would be heart rates 150 to 170 beats per minute. I would have been doing 120 to 135. Now you've got to maintain that continuously for at least 20 minutes, regardless of what age you are. You want at least 20 minutes of that. Going twice as long isn't twice as good. You could push that up to 30 minutes if you want to, but if you want to do more, do 2 sessions a day. 2 20-minute sessions a day, and don't think that one 40-minute session is going to be twice as good. The key to this is this word here, continuously. That should be bold, capitals, underlined. I'll talk about this later. You've got to be disciplined. You've got to make sure that your heart rate does not drop below that minimum any time in that 20 minutes, or you might as well not have done it. I'll be returning to that. This is why we study this. You see, a coach will want to design a good session for their squad. And one of the things you'll want to include in that is a conditioning set, like the one we saw above. You can apply a session that's been written by someone else. You can just write that up on the board and keep telling the swimmers, this is what you do next, this is what you do next, this is how you do it. But if you haven't thought that through yourself, well, you're only working from a recipe. Likewise here, you can follow these conditioning sets. They're set out in the manual, how to do them. But if you really want to understand what's going on, you need to have learned about the physiology. You won't be able to properly monitor what's happening with your swimmers while they're doing this, unless you understand the physiology, and that's what this video is about. Now, energy. Where does your energy come from? Well, it's pretty similar to if you've got a fire, suppose a campfire, something like that. This is the fire triangle. It's fairly familiar to many people. You need a fuel. A campfire, you've got wood. You need oxygen, you get that from the air. You need a source of heat, so to get that going, you stick a match in it or use a cigarette lighter or something. It's got a flame that gets it up to about, I don't know, maybe about 600 Celsius, and away your fire goes. Right, now in a human, we obviously don't run at 600 degrees Celsius. We run at about 37. So what is it that allows for that? Well, what allows for that is these things we call enzymes. Most of them are very specialised proteins, and what they do is they enable chemical processes to occur with less activation energy. Here, if you want your fuel and oxygen to combust, you got to stick a match in it at about 600 degrees. Well, we can't do that. We'd burn our bodies up. A human body runs at about 37 degrees, and it's these enzymes which allow that. they allow this activation energy to be very much lower. And so you get this here, this delta G here represents the energy that you get out of the process of burning your fuel. That might be glucose plus oxygen from air you breathe in, and you breathe out carbon dioxide and water, and this is the amount of energy you get out of the process. Right, now it gets in detail. If you remember from this slide, we've got a whole series of fuel sources which athletes can resort to, and they resort to them in order, one after the other. You'll burn this one first, then that one, then that one, then that one. Coming back down here, so this is that first step. Now, getting close to where the action is that moves muscles, ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate, is the source of the energy which provides the movement, and I've represented that by this little red wheel here. And all these other energy, all these other fuels, all these other energy sources provide the energy to make that little wheel go round. As I was just mentioning, ATP is recharged by the following fuels in order, and that's the next several slides. In the following diagrams, and this is my little innovation, they don't do it like this in the course, so I've tried to illustrate this. In the following diagrams, the fuels are represented by pipes. The rate of energy delivery is proportional to the diameter of the pipe. That's the width of it there. And the length of the pipe represents the duration for which it is delivered. And note, these are not to scale. So that's a fairly short pipe, although it's very relatively wide. And this is, I've labelled this your jump to safety reserve. And it runs for about 3, maybe in fit people up to about 5 seconds. Just imagine in prehistoric times you're out foraging and you are keenly aware of your safety, so you would already know which way you're going to go to get to safety if you happen to be attacked. So this will get you round about, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 running steps, and then a couple of jumps up a tree to get out of the way of some predator maybe. That's what that's there for. Now these are standing by in the muscle. Both of these, the fuel source is phosphocreatine, and the oxidizer is myoglobin. It's similar to haemoglobin, and it just sits there in the muscle holding onto oxygen, ready for an emergency. Okay, after about 3 to 5 seconds, the first source is depleted. You'll note here I've crossed out the myoglobin and phosphocreatine. It will only be recharged after rest and recovery. You can't, if things keep going on, you can't go back to that. It's gone. Now you've got about 20 odd seconds of glucose and haemoglobin. There's the glucose is represented there, and the haemoglobin is holding on to oxygen, and it's going around in the bloodstream. And this is your sprint reserve. And it's good for up to about 25 seconds if we add the phosphocreatine plus the glucose, depending on fitness. So you will see that the only kind of swimmer who can swim 50 metres in under 25 seconds is going to be a super fit adult. And if you think about it, they'll touch the wall at the finish just running on the last of their glucose and haemoglobin that they had in their bloodstream while they were standing on the block. But any further distances, that's in future slides. Right. Now we've crossed out the phosphocreatine. We've crossed out the sprint reserve, but we haven't actually crossed out the glucose. Likewise, we haven't crossed out the haemoglobin in the bloodstream because things flow through these. Oxygen, from now, I've written this here, from now on oxygen must be obtained from air. It crosses the lung membranes to recharge the haemoglobin. And on the fuel side, glycogen, here represented in light blue, is broken down to replenish glucose in the bloodstream. It requires more steps, so it is slower. So you'll see the width of the pipe here is not quite as big as the glucose pipe. And I don't know whether I've got a better place to do this. Glycogen is stored, some in the muscles and most of it in the liver. And it can supply a sustainable pace for up to an hour or two, depending on how old you are, how fit you are, your state of health and all that. This is in liver. Glycogen, yeah, there are some more things to say about that. I think I've got to come back. Yep. Okay. Now the glycogen runs out. It's crossed out here. I could have crossed out that and that at this stage, I suppose. Glycogen runs out after an hour or two. Fat, this one here in yellow, is the only remaining realistic reserve of energy. It has about twice the energy content of carbohydrate per weight. So it's very good stuff. You know, don't worry about having a little bit of padding on you. That's what you resort to if food becomes scarce. Its pathway is an independent but slower process. It doesn't feed into this line here. It feeds directly by a number of more obscure processes straight into charging the ATP. And it's independent, but it's slower. It's slower again than the glycogen. And it can provide energy for many hours of continuous activity. Here I made a little note to myself. What was that about? Yes. I was very fortunate to be at a development squad camp, a regional development squad camp once, for the top squad in the region, and one of the presenters, the head coach actually for the camp, was Rowan Taylor, who at the time was national youth coach, and one of the things he told us about was how youths, many of the girls of that age tend to pack on a bit of extra padding. In swimming, it's not that serious. If you're going to be a high jumper, you don't want to be carrying any weight that doesn't contribute to propulsion. But swimmers, not so important. But anyway, they try to prevent them from becoming too chubby. And the way to do it, you've got to be very, 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 very careful. So you're doing a training session, and your glycogen is running down gradually, and when it runs out, your body will switch to running on fat. Now, as I said, it's a slower process. If you've got your swimmers on a time cycle, you'll notice that their heart rate will jump. They'll become a bit distressed. If you've got them on a heart rate, you'll notice that their speed will slow down. When that happens, you'll realise all this is run down and they're running on fat. What they do is they reduce the heart rate down to 120 beats a minute, because that's about the level of exertion that fat can supply, and they keep them running at that for about 20 minutes, and that'll burn up a small amount of fat. Now I'll get to the danger in that shortly. you've got to be very, very careful. You've got to be vigilant to notice when your glycogen has run out. You've got to make sure that you don't exceed your capacity while you're running on fat. Yeah, let me see. I could say, even without knowing that, you'll notice that, you know, some of the, coming out of the off season, some of the girls might have packed on a little bit of padding, but you'll notice by the time we get up to the Christmas holidays, they've trimmed down a fair bit. Even without doing this, because what happens is if you run your glycogen down substantially, and then you've got to replace it from your food you eat, as long as you don't eat too much, the only way you're going to put on more fat is once your glycogen store is full, it'll spill over into fat. But if you can eat a moderate diet and do a reasonable amount of training, you'll keep your glycogen store cycling up and down like this, and there won't be any spillover. So gradually they'll trim down. Hitting the wall. You might hear, I've heard people like cycling road races say that, you know, after an hour and a half or so, they hit the wall. Well, this is the feeling when the body switches from one source of energy to the next. It is particularly noticeable when the next source has not been conditioned. So if we go back here, swimmers would notice this. They come out of the off season. They've been playing some popular ball sport over the off season, and you know what you don't use you lose, and so this glycogen pipe here has been shrinking. And they come back into the swimming season and try to get straight back into training, and it's hard. The reason for that is the glycogen pipe has shrunk and they've got to expand it again. Another time they hit the wall, an average club swimmer, you know, a moderately fit 10-year-old, in a 50-metre race will get to about 30, maybe 35 metres when this switch occurs. And if they haven't been conditioning their glycogen system, they'll hit the wall at about 30, 35 metres when the body switches from the glucose it started with to having to source energy from glycogen. You'll notice the gears changing there, and they have to struggle to the end. That's why they don't like doing hundreds. We'll come to that. The one that I noticed in recent years was when I burnt all my glycogen after just over 2 hours, and I had not run on fat any time in the previous 40 years, and I fell into a dreadful slump. It took me a while to realise what had happened. So this is what happens to the cycling road races. They burn all their glycogen, and if they haven't conditioned their fat burning system, that'll be a very narrow pipe, and they just can't maintain pace. They'll feel dreadful and slow down. Hitting the wall, yeah, that was talking about hitting the wall. Now, for the benefit of completeness, I hate doing this, but in a life or death emergency, you burnt all your other fuels. Well, no, I'm not quite right there. It's like it says here, whenever the energy demand exceeds the supply from other sources, the muscles can consume their own protein as a last resort. And that's this little green bar down here. So it doesn't matter whether you're just at the start of the race or halfway through it. If you suddenly try to sprint, you know, if you're running on glycogen and you try to sprint, there's a danger your muscles will consume their own protein to try to keep up with the demand. Now, this is what I hate. Some trainers seem to think that it will improve an athlete's performance to push them into this condition. In fact, it is only ever destructive. These are your no pain, no gain personal trainers. My opinion is they should be banned from sport altogether. But they just know that you have to do this to get good. Well, you don't. They can push themselves into that if they want to try it, but don't do it to anyone else. Now, burning protein here. When you consume when you burn protein, ammonia is a byproduct of using protein for fuel. It circulates in the bloodstream until the liver can convert it into urea for elimination. Azotaemia means, I'm not quite sure whether it means nitrogen toxicity or ammonia toxicity, but close enough to the same thing. You've got all this floating around in your body fluids, and it's toxic. Symptoms of azotaemia include nausea, fatigue, and being mentally dazed. I'm not quite sure to talk about that now. Yes, good enough. I'm getting ahead a little bit, but it's appropriate here. If you've got one of those squad trainers who just knows that you have to make the kids feel sick or else your session hasn't been successful, well, it's dangerous, it's detrimental. This is how you'll feel. When I found that, I couldn't go past it. That is exactly how you feel. Nauseated, fatigued, and mentally dazed. So, supposing you've done a hard session in the morning and you get home, and you sit down at the table and you stare at breakfast and you heave, you go inside and vomit. And then you drag your school uniform on and you drag your feet to school, where you sit all day in a fog, taking nothing in. That is what has happened. You've been burning protein. No good for you. Let me see, yes. So think what's happening. The muscles consume their own protein. That causes a decrease in strength, obviously. Your muscle fibres have been eaten up. Therefore, a decrease in performance. If you have to, if you train hard right until up before a swim meet, you probably won't do any personal best times. I say, what's the matter with you? I paid for you to go to training. Now, if the training is being used for weight control, remember that it is the muscles that burn the fuels. Obvious. If you've got less muscle, the rate at which you can burn fuel is less. Azotaemia, which we just talked about before, with its physical and mental effects as described in the previous slide. Nasty stuff. Add to that the psychological effect. This is insidious. You don't notice that it's happening right away. You don't see any immediate effects, but it builds up. The psychological effect is that the untoward experience causes the unconscious mind, that's what I say, you don't know what's going on, the unconscious mind to set an aversion on the activity which caused it. Your body knows that it was swim training that made you feel green, and so it gets more and more difficult for you to find the motivation to do it. This is where your parents have got to yell at you, get out of bed, get your togs on, get in the car, get in the pool. And then a coach will yell at you, get off the wall, get going. Right. Now, you won't want to do it. You'll have no motivation. I've noted here the only thing that offsets this is if you're in the company of your friends, if you're in your social stage, Or if you've transitioned to your competitive stage, you might have the competitive ambition to push yourself through it. But this is where you might have done some sort of sports training all the way through your school days, but because of this aversion here, as soon as you finish school and you don't have to anymore, you just drop it and never go back to it. I consider this more important to understand than properly understanding how to get fit. Understanding how to avoid this is absolutely essential. Okay, so we had one slide for each of these fuel sources. Here they all are in a table. So you work from the bottom. I've worked this from the bottom up. I'm just like that. So phosphocreatine, you've got 3 to 5 seconds, and the oxidizer is myoglobin. Glucose, you've got about 20 seconds worth in your bloodstream, and the oxidizer is haemoglobin. When that runs out, it gets replenished by glycogen, which can run for 1.5 to 2.5 hours, I put here. And the oxidizer is air. Air is the oxidizer for all of these. When the glycogen runs out, you're on fat, and that can run for many hours, but at a moderate pace without doing any harm. And just for completeness, I've put protein in here, which is only for a life or death emergency. Do not do that. Avoid it at all costs. Now this was designed for a training exercise. We were supposed to have activities and quizzes and things like that. So here's an activity that is set. Suppose a swimmer does 50 metres in 36 seconds. That's your average club swimmer. Assume that they do the first 24 seconds on phosphocreatine and glucose. Yeah, that's fairly reasonable. For what proportion or fraction approximately of the race will they need to use glycogen to finish? So here in the light tan colour here, whatever it is, there's your phosphocreatine and glucose, and then you get to about the 35 metre mark. What have I got? Yep. And the body switches and it has to source energy from glycogen. That's what you have to run on until you hit the 50 metre mark. So you can see from this, if I divide this up, I've rigged this so that you'll do about 2/3 of the race on phosphocreatine and glucose and about 1/3 of a 50 metre race on glycogen. Now, I did this on purpose. This will show you why they don't like swimming 100 metres if they're not fit. Suppose the swimmer does 100 metres in 72 seconds. Again, I've rigged some numbers. Assume they do the first 24 seconds on phosphocreatine and glucose. That's all you've got, so this is the same. For what proportion or fraction approximately of the race will they need to use glycogen to finish? So, again, I've rigged this, and if you just divide this in half, they'll do approximately 1/3 of the race this time on glucose, and they'll need to resort to glycogen for the other 2/3 of the race. So if they haven't conditioned their glycogen system, they can barely get to here, and then they've got to turn around and do another length on glycogen. If they haven't conditioned that, that's going to be a hard slog. So down here, the question is, what is the implication for their 100 metre performance if they only train at 50 metres at a time? So if you do this and stop and have a rest, and then do this again and stop and have a rest, you can see that 2/3 of their training is conditioning the glucose system, and 1/3 of their training is conditioning the glycogen system. If they have to do 100, that's all the other way about. They really need to do a lot more of this to be able to achieve this. So what we see as a result of that is, I've made a little note to myself to tell a little story. Imagine some blokes are at work, and they've all got swimmers, just for the sake of argument. And one of them says to another, how are your kids going with the swimming? And the other bloke says, oh, they like the swimming. They don't like doing those hundreds, though. And if you ask the swimmers, what's the matter? Oh, I get disqualified for my turns. Well, that's only the rationalising. They may have been disqualified at turns. But the truth is, they don't want to have to do this. They don't want to have to turn around and slog back up the other end on glycogen if they haven't conditioned themselves for it. And so the blokes chatter about this, and I say, oh, yeah, what about yours? How are yours going? Oh, no, not mine either. So they say, we'll see about that. And so they all conspire to gang up and swarm into a swim club meeting and vote that the 100-metre events be cut out of the program for all age group swimmers. They'll just have hundreds for opens. So that's what's happened around here. We've got wall-to-wall short distance events. And that's how it came about. That's how it came about. They won't work. They're the sorts of people who think if there's any work to be done, well, there should be a machine to do it. We're not going to work. And that's hard work. Now, following on in the same sort of vein, self-deception. I groan about this. I never get to say anything about it, so I'm taking the opportunity to say it here. Self-deception. Here's your scenario. Consider this. Suppose a region has a total of 3,000 competitive members. From part 1, 1 in 30 of those are born sprinters. This comes down to muscle composition. Therefore, 100 of them across the whole region. Scattered across the whole region. Suppose that the region conducts a sprint championship. Suppose that 300 swimmers nominate. This is all fairly realistic. I'm just pulling numbers out of the air, but it's about that order. So the question is, even if all 100 sprinters nominate, why are the other 200 there? Well, I can think up some answers. Firstly, there's what I call the local effect. Most of the swimmers from that city will nominate simply because that is the activity that is on that weekend. They just want to have a swim. For the ones out of town, there's what I call the trip away syndrome, trip away, shopping, party dress, dining out, shopping, yeah, trip away. They love it. They consider their own local swim meet to be a drag. They'd rather go to the big city and have a trip away. And then thirdly, and that's what this is about, there is what I call the self-deception syndrome. Now the two groups above here only account for some of the 200, and self-deception is also at work in most of those as well, plus many more. I don't know how to put a figure on it, but it's prevalent. And it works like this. Part 1 showed how to analyse results over a range of distances, and it shows how to decide whether a swimmer is properly fit or not. You run through that exercise and you would see that very few of our competitive swimmers are actually properly fit. Now, as a result, this is where the self-deception comes in. As a result, they know that going further is always harder. So they convince themselves that they are best at short distance events. And so develop an image of themselves as sprinters. They're trying to join dots that aren't really there. But that's how they join these dots. They are wannabes. Their muscle composition would say otherwise. And they wonder why success is minimal. You come up against an actual born sprinter, they're going to win and you are not. Now it's time to talk in detail about all this if I can remember everything. I'll just repeat if I... yeah, okay. This was my little innovation here. So the physiology covers muscle composition, which is represented by this continuous series here, from predominantly white fibre through general purpose athletes to predominantly red fibre, and the fuels that they run on in order: myoglobin, glucose, myoglobin, phosphocreatine is the fuel, glucose, glycogen and fat. And in case I didn't mention it before, fat does not feed into glycogen. Fat has, I've only put it here because that's what you resort to in this sequence. And the way to make this intelligible is I've put up some images of some representative sports here, and you'll see that there is a sequence to it. So here are some representatives of what I call single effort sports. There's a high jumper, and I put a weightlifter there. That would qualify as a single effort if that's a snatch. These sorts of sports, the effort is over within 5 seconds, 10 at the most, and that's how much phosphocreatine and myoglobin you've got standing by in your muscles, so that's what those are using. They don't have to go any further. Now these popular ball sports, I've grown about these. They're stop-start sports. You know how it works. You get the ball, you go for a little sprint, you pass the ball, and then you jog around following play and recovering. These, you never... I mentioned 25 seconds before, so rarely doing it. A winger could sprint twice the length of the field in 25 seconds. So no one's ever going to go beyond their glucose range. So consequently, footballers and netballers and popular ball sports like that, they never really have to condition their glycogen system. Yeah, I have some disparaging things to say about those, but I think I can deal with that later. Right, from here on up, these are all what I call continuous effort sports. You have to keep going. You're the only exception here is sprinters. They offer a range. These here, the swimmers, track runners, velodrome cyclists, for example, they offer a range of distances, events over ranges of distances, and they cater for everything from white fibre through general purpose to red fibre. And you might, a super fit adult can sprint 50 metres on glucose, but after that, everyone else is fueled by glycogen. A couple of things to mention here amongst these. The swimmers are in with the track runners and the velodrome cyclists. A triathlete told me, and this should be accurate, that 100 metres in the pool is equivalent to 400 metres on the track and equivalent to 700 metres on a bike around the velodrome. I picked this out intentionally as a butterfly swimmer, a very good butterfly swimmer. This is what it should look like. By the time the arms are in line with the shoulders, halfway through the recovery stroke, the head should be back down in line with the spine. The elbows should be straight. The little fingers should be up. They should be leading forward with their wrist or their knuckles at that stage. Too many butterfly swimmers, when they're young, they don't like dragging their hands in the water, so they work out that you can avoid that by going through your propulsion stroke And then at the back here, you're swiveling your arms around at the shoulder joint to flatten the hands parallel to the water. Now, yeah, okay, but what it tends to make them do is to bend their elbows and consequently drop the hands in short in front. Very difficult to correct. Did I mention? Oh yeah, and most of them go along with their head up, which means legs dragging, creating lots of drag. So if you want to be a good butterfly swimmer, and butterfly I believe I like butterfly, I reckon it's the best stroke, because what you've got is you've got a whole body undulation going on here which adds to propulsion. Over a very short distance, butterfly can be faster than can be the fastest stroke. What spoils butterfly is having to get the head up to get a breath. But I've gone off track there. I'll mention these. These are more specialised. These offer ranges of distances. Swimmers, everything from 50 metres up to 1500 in the pool. But then you get into the marathons, and here's a marathon runner, and here are some open water swimmers, and they'll normally complete their event on the last of their glycogen. So it's vital for these to have their glycogen system well conditioned. But here, that's probably an ultra marathon swimmer. Could be swimming the English Channel or something like that, and they'll run out of their glycogen after about 2 hours or so, and after that they're running on fat. So they have to condition their fat burning system, and if you can remember from before, you have to burn all your other sources before the body will start running on fat. So you've got something like a 2-hour training session at least before you get to this point, and your body is forced to learn to run on fat. So don't think just doing 50-metre sprints one at a time and recovering is going to condition your fat burning system. It won't. I'm sure there's more here that I could have forgotten. I talk about this in part 1, the muscle composition, and so yeah, you can see how these line up. These need to be all white fibre. Some white fibre is good. If a footballer doesn't have enough white fibre, what they do is they bulk them up and put them in the centres. They can lumber around, but you wouldn't put them out on the wing. These, a range of distances are offered. These you do have to have. That's what I had to remember, to point out that these, the marathoners and the ultramarathoners, must have a predominance of red fibre. It's no use being a born sprinter and thinking you're going to swim the English Channel. Oh dear, no. So this again, why did I put this here? I think it's so that I can substantiate that I've pretty much achieved the objective. I've described in detail these fuel sources and therefore the necessities of conducting these conditioning sets. That's what this is about, this next slide. We'll return to this. We've seen this before, but I'm going to expand on it. Conditioning set. In the coaching manual I have, there are some 8 of these, 8 different ones, depending on what you're trying to achieve at the time. That's the first of them. It's the simplest. Now the first, it's the first of 3 that all swimmers use during the first 6 weeks of a 12-week program to establish their aerobic foundation. Now, It's pretty hard locally because they go to a swim meet nearly every weekend. But supposing your objective is to peak in time for, say, the state titles, you'll set that date and then you count back 12 weeks. And there are various stages of this 12-week program. And one of the things that happens in the first 6 weeks, all swimmers, regardless of their aptitude, establish their aerobic foundation. They do this sort of thing and a couple of others. Now, I am not going to tell you what the sprint conditioning is, because you'll go, oh good, we'll do the whole 12 weeks like that. We'll win the sprints. You won't, because this is your foundation. If you try to build anything on top of that without establishing this, what you do is going to be rickety. It's not going to be as good as it could have been. You do your first 6 weeks doing this sort of thing. After that, you specialise, if you've got something to specialise for. Now this, I think I mentioned, as adults, you can apply this almost lifelong by applying this calculation here. And note that it does not specify the type of exercise. Swimming's great, it works everything, so it'll get your heart rate up into the range. I think I mentioned, okay, I'll come back. I have myself, look, I don't think that jogging will get your heart rate up into a conditioning range. I don't think that just running by itself, you can run hard enough to get it up into the range, but can you run at that pace for 20 minutes? Some people may be able to, but most would not. And so I've worked out a set of land exercises which alternately use the legs and then the arms, so while one's working the other's resting, and I've been able to get my heart rate up into the conditioning range doing that. Does not specify the type of exercise. Now, I've noted here, and this is the main thing to remember, whether you're an adult or a child, the extreme difficulty is to confront and overcome the instinct to regularly have a good rest first in order to continuously maintain the minimum heart rate. You see, what they do is especially children, they go as fast as they can for a short distance and then they stop and have a good rest, because that's what instinct says to do. And then they'll take off again and go, they've only got one speed, they'll go as fast as they can. When they can't maintain that speed, they stop and have a good rest. I'm running out of time. I could divert and tell you a story of how I came to realise this. I was watching some swimmers I was training, and I was asking why don't they just get their heart rate and take off again like they should? It's because of this instinct. If you stop, you have a good rest before you go again. So even as an adult, you may have to overcome that. You've got to be disciplined. My suggestion is that dedicated swimmers are a minority within their own sport. And here's what happens. Here's summer, here's winter. Summertime, this is a swimmer, I couldn't go past that. So swimmers, dedicated swimmers, they identify primarily as swimmers. In the off season, they'll come down here and play some popular ball sports, most likely. In summertime, they go back and they're in their element. They're dedicated, competitive swimmers. But what happens is, these popular ball sports, most of the girls play netball, most of the boys play football, rugby league around here. And because there's not much of that to do in summertime, they swarm into the swimming clubs. Now, In my experience, netballers are more placid. They, if you tell them, I want you here 5 afternoons a week, they'll go along with that because they know that there are 5 afternoons a week for which after-school activities are required. So you've got to keep your kids busy and doing activities with their friends, so you don't get much resistance from those. But rugby league footballers, oh dear. They just know that rugby league football is the greatest game on earth. Well, it may be, but because it's the greatest game on earth, they know that every other sport should be conducted the same way. So they'll confront you and stand up there with their arms crossed and they'll say, why do we gotta? At footy, we just do a train and run Tuesday evening and play a game on the weekend. So they don't understand all this about conditioning that you need to be an even moderately successful competitive swimmer. So you want to do at least 3 of those conditioning sets a week at a minimum to even be just in the middle of the pack. So what these footballers tend to do is they just, I'm not doing this. And so what they do is they boot out the accredited swim coaches and appoint amateurs who think the same way as they do and talk their language. And we get all this tends to take over. And so we get all this sprint mentality that I've spoken of before. I better rush on, time's getting away. OFF, yeah. Okay. Objective, future and feedback. The objective was to correlate physiology in terms of muscle composition, that's part 1, and energy sources, which has been the subject of this video, to the spectrum of sports, so that's everything from your weightlifters and high jumpers through to your channel swimmers. The immediate future for candidates of anyone who's watched this video would be to learn how to condition the physiology. I have not said anything about that except for that one little example for the events selected. That is the most efficient ways to get fit. And just swimming further faster or going as fast as you can for as far as you can and stopping and having a good rest is not the best way to work to get fit. Feedback. Well, if you're watching this as a YouTube video, please leave any comments or questions in the comments section below. And thank you for your attention.